Well, we live in a culture that emphasises personal rights against holistic health, ideology against biology. And we saw a screaming example of that last week when the media trumpeted a tragic case of a teenager who needed counselling and care, not castration and confusion. Let's check it out. So have you heard of BIID, Body Integrity Identity Disorder? It describes the extremely rare phenomenon of persons who desire the amputation of one or more healthy limbs or who desire a paralysis. Some of these people mutilate themselves, others ask surgeons for an amputation or for the transection of their spinal cord. And according to Wikipedia, it's also called amputee identity disorder or xenomelia. And it's a rare mental disorder characterised by a desire to have a sensory or physical disability or feeling discomfort with being able-bodied. It begins in early adolescence and results in harmful consequences. People with this condition may refer to themselves as transabled. Here's a woman who blinded herself. According to Jewel, her fascination with blindness began early in childhood. Jewel said, "When I was young, my mother would find me walking in the halls at night. When I was 3 or 4 years old, by the time I was 6, I remember that thinking about being blind made me feel comfortable." And here's the case reported just last month of a 20-year-old patient said he'd been experiencing incessant thoughts about the 4th and 5th fingers on his left hand. The 2 fingers that caused him stress were ultimately cut off in a bid to treat him. Oh, by the way, the bizarre case emerged from Quebec in Canada. Yeah, you may not be surprised by that. No insult to my Canadian friends. But there are plenty more examples. And I'm sure you know of someone who has had anorexia nervosa. Tragic disease. According to the Mayo Clinic, anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterised by an abnormally low body weight, an intense fear of gaining weight, and a distorted perception of weight. To prevent weight gain or to continue losing weight, people with anorexia usually severely restrict the amount of food they eat. They may control calorie intake by vomiting after eating, misusing laxatives, diet aids, diuretics, or enemas. They may also try to lose weight by exercising excessively. And no matter how much weight is lost, the person continues to fear weight again. Now, anorexia isn't really about food. It's an extremely unhealthy and sometimes life-threatening way to try to cope with emotional problems. And when you have anorexia, you often equate thinness with self-worth. So how do we respond to anorexia? Do we offer weight loss pills, liposuction, prescription for enemas? Of course not. That would not be loving or healthy. There are a number of options you can see: psychotherapy, family-based therapy, nutrition support, treatment to restore health. But what you'll notice is that none of these treatments for either xenomelia or anorexia involve cutting the body. That would simply worsen the confusion and the harm. So let me show you a case last week where the rules completely change for a condition where the mind rejects the reality and where we should heal the mind, but the cultural narrative and the cultural elites and the media and the politicians want to support the confusion and cut the body. So the New Zealand Herald on Friday featured this story. A transgender teen tries to cut off breast in self-mastectomy, Wellington doctors. And the article says a New Zealand high schooler attempted to cut off his own breasts. So there's an immediate media myth. It's a girl. In an act of desperation after years on a stretched public health system waitlist for gender-affirming surgery, according to a report in the New Zealand Medical Journal today. The 18-year-old female-to-male transgender man, well, no, it's a girl who believes she's a boy, went to hospital several hours into the self-attempted mastectomy after he became concerned about damaging a nerve. Let me just read it as it says in the report. Surgery went well. The teen was discharged a day later, the scars well healed and his self-esteem and confidence up at a post-operation appointment a month later, according to 3 Wellington Regional Hospital doctors. It says he, reported improvement in self-esteem and self-confidence in his ability to complete schoolwork and was looking forward to enrolling at university. Assessment by the acute mental health team after the teen's emergency department admission found he didn't have a psychiatric disorder and wasn't suicidal, they wrote. The teenager, who had a background of gender dysphoria, was on testosterone treatment and was awaiting gender affirmation surgery, had watched a how-to video on YouTube, prepared appropriate equipment, marked the incision, and considered pain relief and bleeding. There are so many problems in this media report. We're expected to believe that an 18-year-old girl who attempts to cut off her own breasts after watching a YouTube video has superb self-esteem, and there are absolutely no issues with mental health. What would these same doctors say if the same patient was a skinny girl who was trying to gouge the fat out of her stomach, or cut her buttocks off because she said her bottom was too fat? What would they say if a young patient pleaded with them to cut their arm off because they wanted to be disabled? Well, this is what the doctors said about the 18-year-old girl cutting off her breasts. They said not all transgender people wanted gender affirmation surgery, but those who did should be able to get it. And limited access to the surgery in New Zealand was an increasing issue, the doctors wrote. It's hard to believe the logic and all of that. Now, other media were into this. The Post in Wellington, who just aren't that very smart, had the report as well. A young transgender person's attempt to perform their own mastectomy highlights a healthcare system where gender diverse people's needs are being chronically unmet, experts say. Now, let's just change that for a minute. The article is about a young girl desperately ill from anorexia, and she is stick thin. And so, according to this article, they would say, a young girl's attempt to perform a gastrectomy, which is basically taking out your stomach, highlights a healthcare system where anorexic people's needs are being chronically unmet, expert says. Well, you wouldn't read that. You might read, well, it highlights a system where needs are being chronically unmet, but it's mental health needs. Now, the three doctors who wrote the article also said in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there is an overwhelming unmet need for masculinizing chest reconstruction for transgender men. In other words, an overwhelming need for women to cut off their breasts. They aren't real doctors, are they? They're almost no better than your local butcher. Now, NewsHub had a similar report. And featured a documentary done by Paddy Gow where doctors attempted to persuade us that puberty blockers are reversible and there's no negatives. And they had an interview with Dr. Rita Yang, who you can see in the image there, one of the only doctors who perform these operations. You know why there's so few? It's like abortion doctors and euthanasia doctors. Hard to find because it's not normal. It's not what life-affirming, Hippocratic oath-signing doctors do. First, do no harm. Now, watch this clip of this transgender doctor and imagine that we're talking about a young girl with anorexia or a person who wants to be disabled. And remember, when she says a trans man, that's a girl who wants to be a boy and vice versa.
This is incredibly major surgery. What happens when they wake up? How do they react, your patients?
I mean, I wish you were, if it's just the sheer joy of finally, having this last piece of a puzzle that kind of fall into place for them. And we're not unfamiliar in this hospital to be witnessing, tears of joy and just the elations and the relief of not having to hide your body and to be able to just kind of get on with your life. Just for a young trans guy, to be able to just get on with your life, and it's big for them.
So when someone sits down in here, they know what they want and what they need?
Yes.
They really know?
Yes. Bear in mind, Patty, that all the patients who come through this door to see me have already been through a very long journey of initial diagnosis. They've been through a very long, comprehensive assessment process. And because of the hormone treatment that they have had for years, they're already long lived in their gender identity, been accepted as their gender identity. By the time they present to a reconstructive surgeon's office, often the answer is very crystal clear. Say for a trans man, what they really, really would want is to be able to go out there and enjoy the next summer by the beach without having to hide their body and wear these binders and things like that, isn't it? So for a trans woman, sometimes a 1-hour operation that shaved down their Adam's apple just means that they no longer have to always hide behind scarves and things like that for them. So it just provides that next level of ease and comfort and freedom of living that I think all of us deserve. So, yeah.
Do we need more of these operations done to help the kind of people that you help in this office?
I believe so. We are seeing more patients entering gender service, and so long term I am projecting that potentially more clients will require gender affirmation genital surgeries.
Do we need more of you, basically?
No.
Yes. Yes, that's the, yeah, absolutely. I have come to the realization that no matter how transformational reconstructive surgeries are, the biggest factor for my patients' well-being lies in the society's acceptance.
Yeah, we just need to accept trans and anorexia and xenomelia. Do we need more of you? Yes. We need more butchers. We need more operations. I would say follow the money. Now, the News Hub article showed the effect of the operation, and if you're a bit squeamish, you may want to look away for 15 seconds. Look away. This is a teen girl's chest and breasts. Apparently all normal, nothing to see. Now, News Hub weren't finished with the issue, and they took the opportunity to question the Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, on it. And they said to him, will there be better access to so-called gender-affirming healthcare to the teen girl who watched a YouTube video and then attempted to remove her breasts? Now, what would you say if you were asked that? Rather than Luxon saying what I think all of us would have said, i.e., well, wow, I hadn't heard about that case. How tragic. It sounds like she needs urgent mental health care. And I have the Minister of Mental Health next to me, because you'll see Matt Ducey, the Minister of Mental Health, next to Luxon in the interview. And we will commit to giving her the counselling she obviously needs. No, he doesn't say that. He fluffs his line with this unequivocal and, in my view, morally deficient response.
For better access to gender-affirming surgery after a Kiwi teen attempted to remove their own breasts following a YouTube instruction. And what can the government do to improve access to such surgery to avoid situations like this?
Oh, well, look, I'm not aware of those comments at this point, but what I'd say to you is in the budget, you're going to see a lot more money being spent in healthcare in general. You're going to see us spending money on health and education and law and order. That's what New Zealanders expect us to do. They want better services, particularly in those three areas, and that's what our budget will deliver.
Yeah, now in fairness, he may be totally unaware of the case, although there was a heck of a lot of media coverage. And I'm surprised he wasn't briefed on it, especially by the Mental Health Minister standing next to him. But the response is you're going to see a whole lot more money being spent on healthcare in general, rather than, well, gee, young girls butchering themselves need mental health care first. That's our priority for these young people. So that's the sorry state of things. Now, just before I finish, let's finish on a positive. Let me tell you about something that happened at the conference at the weekend in Wellington that I spoke at, that featured speakers from around the country and overseas who are challenging gender ideology in both our schools and in our health system to protect our children. And here's the media coverage from News Hub. Apologies for the sound quality, but this was their coverage of the conference that went for 5 hours.
Hundreds of people supporting trans rights have gathered to oppose a controversial anti-trans summit in Wellington's new conference centre. The protesters were opposing the views of Destiny Church leader Brian Tamaki and British activist Posey Parker being heard at the Unsilenced summit. The protesters danced and waved placards calling for recognition of trans rights.
Ah, yes, superb reporting. The conference went for 5 hours. The protesters outside lasted an hour. It was rent a mob, Palestine, Ukraine, anything you could find. But that's all News Hub showed. They never came in to hear what we were actually talking about. Shameful. But one of the surprise speakers was Mel from Australia. She was on the Spotlight documentary in Australia last year. And here's just a quick summary of her story.
Born a girl, Mel grew into an unhappy teenager. She suffered from depression and confusion about her sexuality and began to believe her life would be better if she transitioned.
How did that begin?
Probably like through puberty. I had like quite a few experiences that were negative. Like I was sexually assaulted. And I feel like that was quite a big fuel for me wanting to transition and not be a woman anymore.
Because you felt what being a woman was making you vulnerable?
More vulnerable and like an easy target. I thought that I was safer within like a male identity.
So you thought changing genders would solve that, would provide a degree of protection?
That's not like, that's part of like the magical thinking that I had at that time, where it was like, I could be someone completely different and I wouldn't have to be me. Like I wouldn't have to deal with everything that came along in my life. I spoke to like a trans activist who was like, I felt the exact way you felt, like how you feel in your body and like what you deal with. And it kind of like really kind of solidified like, oh, transitioning could be like the solution. Maybe all my unhappiness is because I was born in the wrong sex.
And those answers now, in hindsight, were a mistake.
Yeah, they left me worse off. Like while I was in the LGBT community, it was like, there's your biological family, they're the family you don't choose, and then there's your logical family, they're the ones we choose you.
When she was 18, Mel began living as a man. She called herself Mason. However, to truly begin the transition, she needed a doctor to prescribe her testosterone, but that proved no problem.
I just got diagnosed and I was on my way.
So how many hours, minutes, days did it take before from the time you went to the doctor?
What do you mean with how long did it take to get diagnosed? Like under an hour.
Under an hour?
Yeah. Because I was primed with like, if you don't transition, you're gonna like die, you're gonna kill yourself. You're just priming people to do this. You're priming people to hurt themselves.
The testosterone did its job. A deeper voice, facial hair, more muscle, and weight. But her next step was a radical and irreversible one.
All my hatred of being a woman was just focused on my chest, like on my breasts.
At 26, Mel had a double mastectomy. But instead of the happiness she sought, she was left with a pervading sense of loss.
After the operation, Mel, was there a light bulb moment? What made you want to be a woman again?
I don't know if it's light bulb, but it's like I heard I was called Mason, and that literally just like, it just felt so foreign and alien. And then it's just like, why is it hearing that name just feels so disorienting for me?
Yeah, now Mel was at our conference in Wellington. And in the conference, which featured more diversity, equity and inclusion than anything left-wing politicians or activists could even dream of or protest about, Mel shared, even took her shirt off to prove her point. And I had the privilege and honour to pray for Mel after she'd shared her personal testimony, a double mastectomy, and her testimony and her brokenness and mental anguish from her journey moved many to tears. And the scripture that came to mind was Psalm 139, that she is fearfully and wonderfully made. And Jeremiah 29:11, God has a plan for good and not for evil, to give her a future and a hope over her. And so we prayed for healing of mind and body and boldness for such a time as this, a Queen Esther moment. God has a plan for good for every one of us, no matter our past. And she gave me a really, really powerful hug after the prayer. It was a moment of truth. Mel's testimony in complete contrast to the deception of the media coverage of the tragic 18-year-old going down the road that Mel had. We can only pray that the 18-year-old featured in these media stories last week receives truth, healing, and peace also. Please pray for her.